My presentation tonight is USS Red Rover, a hospital first. And we're coming to you tonight from City Club in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Hey, thank you for that warm introduction. My name is Mark Laubacher. I'm an RN by trade, a graduate of a major university in Central Ohio in Columbus. Some of you can probably figure out what that is. It's called Capital University. I'm also a paramedic in the state of Ohio. I have 4 canned presentations that I've put together over the years, and I've presented all of them to Civil War roundtables across the country, all the way as far west as our colleagues in St. Louis, as far as northeast in the state of Delaware, as far south as several organizations in Florida, and even in our friends in what they referred to as Nolens, Louisiana. Tonight's presentation, USS Red Rover, a hospital first, is going to look at the first hospital ship, not only by the U.S. Navy, but actually it started out in the U.S. Army during the Civil War. All of the 4 presentations that I have put together, 2 of them are published. I'm working on 2 other papers for the other 2, including this one. And they all, because of my medical background, they all have some sort of medical component to them, hence tonight's presentation. A couple other things too. One, do we have any hockey fans in the audience? Very good. Now, when I was looking at the map, does that mean you're a Blackhawks fan? Or are you Minnesota North Stars?
Columbus Blue Jackets.
Oh, outstanding. Columbus Blue Jackets, as am I. Very good, sir. And I did not pay him to say that. On a serious note, so Blackhawks fans here tonight? They're actually skating tonight, as are the Blue Jackets. So if you're not aware, Columbus does have we are a major league city. As of the year 2000, so 21 years ago, the NHL, the Columbus Blue Jackets stepped foot on the ice 21 years ago. For those of you not aware, the way we get our name is the original owner, John H. McConnell. His favorite color was blue. And he says, I don't care what color you make the uniforms are as long as there's blue in there. And so they tried to figure out, all right, we need to have a nickname, and they came up with the name Blue Jacket. And this was in with the advent, the internet was still very much in its infancy, but the scribes of the media went out and tried to figure out, all right, what's Blue Jacket? There is an Indian chief named Blue Jacket, and many people to this day think that the Blue Jackets are to commemorate that individual, and that is a fallacy. The name Blue Jackets is to honor Ohio's contribution to the Civil War, specifically Columbus, the city contribution. For those of you not aware, there were no fewer than 3 cities in downtown Columbus who made Union sack coats for the infantry, hence the name Blue Jacket. And our alternate jersey, our 3rd jersey, if you will, has this as the crest on the jersey. In fact, in the arena is a replica of an 1857 smoothbore Napoleon, and that cannon gets fired at the beginning of the game, and every time the Blue Jackets score a goal, which is many. Tonight's presentation USS Red Rover, a hospital of firsts. You should have, I made available to you the abstract of tonight's presentation, and on the back has the also my bio. If you want, I also brought with me the bibliography for tonight's presentation. I would be happy to give that to you at the end of the presentation upon your request. The reason I make that available is during one of my first presentations at an ensemble such as this, there was a certain individual who stood up and said, "Where did you get your information?" Because my presentation was an original, never been published, on snake bites to soldiers during the Civil War. And he challenged me on it, where did I get my information, so I make my references available upon your request. I have 50 copies. So here's the ship that for which we're going to take a look at tonight. For those of you who are landlubbers, this is the front of the ship. We call that the bow. This is the starboard side, or for again, for you landlubbers, that would be the right. The stern, and then we cannot see the port side. The easy way to remember that is left has 4 letters in it for port. Port has 4 letters. Starboard has more letters than port. Likewise, right has more letters than left. That's how it's easy to remember. At the onset of the war, the Union Army acted in concert in the Western Theater with the Western Gunboat Flotilla and Mortar Fleet. This gunboat flotilla operated under the War Department, but again, they acted in concert with the Army. And in middle of March of 1862 was the Battle of Island Number 10 on the Mississippi River. The Confederate forces sailed multiple ships up the Mississippi River to an area that they identified as a potential bottleneck for Union forces coming down, so they would not be able to take Memphis and sail on down and take Vicksburg. The Western Gunboat Flotilla, under the command of Admiral Foote, eventually prevailed, and the Confederate States ship Red Rover was captured. And this capture occurred on April 7th, which also, by the way, I brought thousands of dollars in cash and prizes with me, so I'm going to ask some trivia questions as we go on this evening. So for the first question is, what's the significance about April 7th of 1862? What day, sir? Oh, you must be, if the whole, whatever your career was, if you failed at that, you'd make a great ventriloquist, because your lips didn't move, but I heard the voice coming across over here somewhere. Yeah. Very good. So it is, correct, it is the second day of Shiloh. The Red Rover served as a floating barracks, a floating hotel, a floating Hilton, if you will, for the Confederate States ship New Orleans. The New Orleans was a floating battery, so it had cannon on it, artillery pieces on it, and the men who, basically it was a barge, and the men that fired such artillery would stay on the Red Rover. Island number 10, if you're not aware, was located near New Madrid, Missouri, on the Mississippi River. Question number 2, trivia question: how does island number 10 get its name? Yes, sir. Give it up for him, folks. I don't know what his name is, but he's not. Okay, that's enough. That's enough. That's enough. That's correct. So, Excellent. So at the confluence of the mighty Mississippi and the majestic Ohio, from that point south were assorted islands all the way down to Vicksburg. And to aid in navigation, said islands were assigned a number. And so they would figure out, they could basically, the pilots of the ships that were navigating the Mississippi would be able to figure out geographically where they were, provided a couple things. One, when the islands were assigned a number, depending on where you're at in that particular season, high tide, low tide, if you will, high water, low water, some of those islands were visible and did not have a number. Some of those islands were submerged that did have a number. It may be during the nighttime when the navigation occurred and maybe those islands got missed. Also, some of those islands had proper names. In all, there were 125 islands, and they did start the count from the confluence of there at Cairo, Illinois, not Cairo, Egypt. Cairo, Illinois. So you're sailing down south here, and you can see here's island number 9, island number 10. There's an island that does not have a name nor a number, and there's island number 11. So was this 11? When you're sailing around, you could easily lose count. But anyway, so you can see where there's a bottleneck here, and the Confederacy set up shop there to try and preserve and protect the flotilla from sailing down and taking Memphis, which eventually happened, I believe, on June 6th of 1862, pretty much without a fight. So for those of you not aware, this is Kentucky. There's a line going across here. This is Tennessee. The line goes, this is all Missouri. There's New Madrid, and the line goes across here. So even today, this is Kentucky territory, actually. So this is where the battle occurred. If you wanted to try and go visit island number 10, there's not much left to it because of erosion. Many of the islands, even to this day, have been eroded away. And the map of the Mississippi River does not look anything like it does today compared to 160 years ago. This battle did get quite a bit of notoriety. It was actually published, the significance of it was made available in Harper's Weekly. The Battle of Island Number 10, this would be in the May 3rd edition, 1862. There is the ship Red Rover. What happened in March, middle of March, is that a shell went through the 3 decks. It started taking on water, and the Confederacy basically stuck it in the bank on the side of the river. And then it was captured there on April 7th, second day out, of course, coincidentally with Shiloh. Many of these wrecks that you see here were captured. They were all captured by the Union forces. Many of them were refloated, as was the Red Rover. When the Red Rover was refloated, a particular Army captain who was assistant quartermaster by the name of George Weins, pictured here and again here on these steps, he proposed and was granted supervision of converting Red Rover into a hospital ship. He recognized, man, this is a floating hotel. It already has beds. It has many other accommodations that we'll learn about tonight that makes it conducive to becoming a hospital ship. And he basically asked Admiral Foote for this, and Foote says, yes, by all means, proceed with all possible dispatch to St. Louis to procure a good, comfortable steamer to be fitted up as a hospital boat. with a surgeon, steward, etc., complete. A couple of issues here to keep in mind is that during the Peninsula Campaign, there were many ships that were used as ambulances, basically to transfer, move injured soldiers off the battlefield to field hospitals. Those were known as hospital transport ships. HTS was the abbreviation for them. Some of them are very famous. DA January, City of Nashville, City of Alton for Illinois. There was a whole laundry list of such hospital transport ships. They were basically water ambulances, if you will. There was no medical care that was, conducted for the injured or ill aboard the ship. Therefore, they were not technically hospitals. This is the first hospital ship. And so they basically patch up Red Rover. They sail it up from island number 10 up to St. Louis for repairs and basically to fit it out as a hospital ship. So Foots gave them the okie dokie to do that 1 month later. So to give you a perspective here about tonight's presentation, the Red Rover is basically sailing up and down the Mississippi River from the confluence right there at Cairo, Illinois, and during its lifetime, once Vicksburg is taken, that you'll hear about tonight, all the way to New Orleans, and sail up and down, providing care to the injured and sick, Union forces, as well as delivering medical supplies, as well as delivering sustenance like meat products aboard to the Union forces. It also, I won't mention it specifically, except for right now, they were actually also be instrumental in actually burying the dead along the banks of the Mississippi. Zoom in here a little bit more for you and help you out. So here's what we're talking about. So at the top there, this is St. Louis. There's Cairo, but the yellow dot will be the home base for Red Rover during the operations for the remainder 3-4 years of the war. That red dot signifies Mound City, Illinois. Mound City will be very instrumental in, you'll hear about that tonight. But basically, when you hear Mound City, just think, if you want, you can substitute that for Cairo, Illinois, which is the confluence, again, of the Mississippi and Ohio. The red arrow is for where island number 10 is at. Memphis will fall on June 6th without much of a battle. Other theater of operations for this ship, it will be instrumental in picking up injured on the White River, the Arkansas River, as well as those that were injured during Porter's campaign and Grant's campaign to take Vicksburg, and even as well as the Red River campaign. Some of you may know of a young gentleman by the name of Bailey who would construct some docks, or some locks. Red Rover was, while it did not sail up the Red River, was there at the confluence of the Red River and Mississippi and did take part in that event. And it would also sail all the way down to New Orleans. Keep in mind also, ladies and gentlemen, that when Memphis fell, New Orleans had already fallen, and the tie-up was at Vicksburg. So while the federal forces owned the water all the way down to just north of Vicksburg and all the way from New Orleans up to the south of Vicksburg, they only owned the water. Keep in mind, Arkansas, they do not own the land of Arkansas. They do not own the land of Mississippi nor Tennessee, and the ships, Red Rover, will be under fire. Likewise, all the boats of the flotilla will be under fire. They own the water, they do not own the banks on either side. I realize this slide's a little busy. I'll bring it up to speed for you here. So again, there's St. Louis up there. Notice that the Mississippi River from St. Louis to Cairo is fairly a straight line. When you get down into Arkansas, Tennessee, Mississippi, it becomes very tortuous. You will travel south, the next thing you know, you're traveling north for a while, just to make the turn to go back south. And this slows shipping lanes down quite substantially. Here is signifying the forts of Henry and Donelson that would fall in the February of 1862, primarily not only from Grant's forces, but Fort Henry, as you may be aware, falls because of the flotilla, Foote's flotilla. They sailed down that river, the Tennessee River, and take Fort Henry without much of a fight. Grant will cross the land, and the flotilla goes back up north and comes back down the Cumberland side to help take Fort Donelson. Two of those ships from the Foote's flotilla will sail down, and I'm getting off course here a little bit, no pun intended, but in my opinion, it is the Tyler and Lexington, those ships from the flotilla that saved the federal forces for day 2 at Shiloh, because they arrived there the evening of day 1 and constantly shell Confederate forces that evening to keep them at bay, to protect the federal forces there at Shiloh. That was the Tyler and Lexington, the gunboats. But the rest of the flotilla will sail down here and is instrumental in taking island number 10, and they will eventually sail down, and again, like I said, and will take Memphis without much of a fight. Some of you may recall the massacre at Fort Pillow, for which you'll hear about tonight, which Red Rover will partake. Here's a picture. This is not part of the ship here. This is actually a coal barge. A couple other interesting pieces here. Again, this is the main, what I would call the main deck. Livestock was on the ship here on that main deck, so cattle, chickens, live cattle, live chickens, and also they would procure meat for federal forces, and they would sail up and down the Mississippi River distributing live meat, cattle, poultry, as well as medical supplies, and in addition to being a hospital ship on these decks up here. The Western Sanitary Commission contributed $3,500 to help outfit this ship and contributed medical supplies. Jacob Foreman out of the Western Sanitary Commission mentioned that the ship involved here, was accordingly remodeled in her cabin arrangements and complete outfit of beds, bedding, furniture, sanitary stores, medical dispensary, etc., supplied by the Commission. The services of surgeons, an apothecary, steward, and nurses were engaged. An apothecary would be a pharmacist on board, and again, this is not a water ambulance. This is a hospital on water. This is a hospital ship. It has nurses, physicians, surgeons on board to provide care and treatment. So a little bit about the specifications of the ship. It's a side wheel wooden steamer, just under 800 tons. Length is, as you can see, 6 feet. That actually equates to 85 yards if you want to envision a football field. 41 feet wide, which would be 14 yards wide, and it sat in the water when fully loaded 8 feet. Because it has two wheels, one on each side, it would have 2 engines powered by 5 boilers, which burned 38 bushels of coal per hour. When I was a young lad, I would go to my maternal grandmother's in the fall, and she would give us this lightweight wooden basket with two metal handles. And they were called bushel baskets. And we would have to go pick peaches or apples, and we were not allowed to drop the apples or the peaches into the basket. We had to daintily lay them in there because otherwise they would bruise. It wasn't so much to carry them out to the orchard as it was to carry them back, because now it's loaded, and over the years I've come to appreciate the fact that a bushel will hold 8 gallons of water if you were to fill it up. So that's how much coal we're burning per hour, and times 8 of those. It had a top speed of 9 knots, which would be 10 miles per hour, averaged about 5. Now keep in mind it goes a lot faster. It can reach those 10 miles per hour when it's going downstream, so from Memphis down to toward New Orleans. It's going to slow down when it needs to go north. Also, it can go a lot faster in the springtime after the winter thaw versus in the dead of summer like in August when the water is not that deep and the current is not that strong. It had 12 officers with 25 crew members, and then there was the medical staff, at least 30, sometimes up to 40, 45. It did have some armament on it, a 35-pound gun on its bow, and the crew, because they were naval crew members, sailors, they had small arms as well. Pennock, who was the commander of the naval base there at Cairo, mentioned that the ship was supplied with everything necessary for the restoration to life, to health of the sick and disabled seamen. So there's the gun. You can actually see part of it here. There was what that 32-pound gun would look like. There were 2 times when it was charged and ready to fire. I'm confident that they actually did live firings without shot or canister or shell. But there were 2 times when it was ready to fire, to return fire against the Confederacy. As far as accommodations, she has bathrooms, laundry, elevator for the sick from the lower to the upper deck, an amputating room, 9 different water closets, gauze blinds to the windows to keep the cinders and smoke from annoying the sick, 2 separate kitchens for the sick and well, a regular corps of nurses, and 2 water closets on every deck. A floating Hilton. So 2 months later, after being refloated and sent up to St. Louis for repairs and to make ready, it comes down to Cairo and Mound City, and on July 10th it is underway. On board are 2 surgeons, Acting Assistant Surgeon George Bixby and George Hopkins. Ironically, both of these gentlemen are from Boston, but they never met each other, never knew each other until they were on board the ship. George Bixby will serve the entire life on board USS Red Rover throughout the war and even afterwards when the war ceased, because Red Rover will be instrumental in trying to get those injured and sick home. The life of Red Rover will also see additional 6 surgeons come aboard and serve in various capacities as surgeons. On board the ship is how long could they stay on the brown water without assistance? 3 months. They had stores for 3 months for the crew and medical supplies for a roster, a capacity, a house full of 200 patients. Also, it was able to carry 300 tons of ice. 300 tons of ice initially sounds like a lot. Some of you may say, well, that doesn't sound like a whole lot to me. What if I told you that 300 tons of ice, imagine a 1-gallon milk jug. You would need 87,000 milk jugs full of ice to equate to 300 tons of ice. Put another way, a 10-foot by 10-foot by 10-foot high room filled with water frozen. I need 11 of those. Would equate to 300 tons of ice. Quite a significant amount of ice that it's able to carry. What also that does is preserve fresh beef and poultry for the Union forces sailing up and down on the flotilla. Here is our Surgeon Bixby, who again, he serves the entire time, becoming his good friend George Hopkins. I mentioned that Red Rover it's stationed at Mound City. So here's Mound City, Illinois on the majestic Ohio. Here is Cairo, Illinois at the confluence of the mighty Mississippi and the majestic Ohio. This distance is 8 nautical miles. Keep in mind, at full speed going downstream, Red Rover can travel 8 miles per hour. So basically from here to here, it takes 1 hour. I'll help you out later how long it takes to go from city to city when we're talking about care of the wounded. I'm going to zoom in right here. So here we are. Here's the hospital at Mound City where Red Rover will take many of its patients. Here is the railroad line coming right from the building, the Illinois Central Railroad. And you can see this is the depth of the Ohio at the time. Keep in mind that the Red Rover had a draft of 8 feet. So the shallowest part here is 17 feet, so not an issue to get stuck in the mud. This is a picture of the Mound City Hospital. There's a diagram of it, a sketch, if you will. It was started by nurses from the Immaculate Conception up in Notre Dame. We'll hear more about them tonight. This is actually the actual building. Here it says Mound City Furniture Company. This building had multiple different ownerships during its lifetime. It's no longer standing. This is the front of the building. Behind it would be the Ohio River. And this is all lumber to make assorted furniture. But this would be called Mound City General Hospital during the war. Red Rover had many, shockingly, non-military personnel who were hired by the flotilla to work on ships, including Red Rover. These civilians were women. They were paid. We know of 9 women on the roll. Their salaries varied from $8 to $10, $15, $20 per hour. One of such ladies was the name of Anne Graves. She was hired in April of 1862, months before Red Rover was set to water. She was hired, her title was chambermaid, and she was paid $20 a month, plus 1 day of rations. Other positions aboard Red Rover were laundress. We had dirty laundry from the bedding that needed to be washed. There were others who were paid. Back in the day, a nurse during the Civil War was male. Unlike my current profession, I'm in the minority. Only 7% of my colleagues are male across the nation. There, during this time, predominantly males. Hence, men outnumbered the female nurses, not only on land, but in hospitals and on this ship. Incidentally, keep in mind, Anne Graves was paid $20 an hour. Union infantry were paid $13 an hour. Or excuse me, she was paid $13 a month. They were paid $13 a month, Union infantry. So it's June 11th of 1862. the Red Rover will get its first patient. His name is David Sands. He's from the USS Baton, suffering from a bout of cholera. Baton was the flagship or the flotilla. 4 more ill sailors will be admitted that day. The next day, 13. And on June 13th, just 4 days later, they now have a census of 56. Keep in mind, as many as 200 would max them out. What happened here is the word got out that there's a floating Hilton on the water. And I got a nice, comfortable bed, 3 hots and a cot. Life is really great. Mr. Captain, I'm not feeling very well. Can I go on board Red Rover? That way you don't have to take care of me. And the captain said, hey, that's a great job. So that's why this number inflated so rapidly. So much so that the high command got wind of this, and Red Rover said, you know what, this is not what we were designed to do. So they had to put a stop to it and said, hey, we realize everybody has men who are sick. You need to care for your sick to allow us to care for the wounded and the very sick. If you have very sick sailors on board, we understand. But if it's a hangnail, the sniffles, you need to deal with it on your own. All the conveniences and appliances of a hospital are fully provided, and these are added the neatness and order essential to such a large an establishment. This comes from the gentleman, our quartermaster. They will get their first trauma patient on June 17th. It is a patient or several patients from USS Mound City. Incidentally, it was Mound City that captured the Red Rover there at island number 10. But Mound City, pictured here, is a gunboat belonging to the flotilla, and it will be involved in an expedition on the St. Charles, Arkansas, on the White River. And I'll bring that picture back up again for you. It took the literature says it took a shell and it pierced the boiler and caused the boiler to explode. I don't think it would be a shell, actually, that pierced the ship and the boiler. I'm thinking it was probably solid shot. A shell would have exploded on the deck, maybe got below deck, but I don't think it would have penetrated the boiler. I could be wrong, but I think it was probably solid shot. Anyway, the boiler explodes. They have a total crew and officers of about 170. There were 135 fatalities/casualties, including 37 scald injuries from the steam that were emitted on Red Rover. And this happened on June 17th, and some of you may say, well, why did it take them 2 days to get admitted to Red Rover when Red Rover is part of the flotilla? Well, keep in mind, here's the White River. So this expedition happened at the point of that yellow arrow. Red Rover does not sail up the White River. It will not sail up the Arkansas River for an engagement. It does not sail up the Red River for engagement. It stays on the Mississippi River. It does not want to get caught in that bottleneck. And keep in mind, these ships have to turn around to come home. So Red Rover stays on the Mississippi River. The distance from that engagement to the mouth of the Mississippi River is 57 nautical miles. When you draw a straight line, it is 30. Again, just to illustrate how tortuous these rivers are, including the White River, it took them it's twice as long. And 57 nautical miles, let's just round it up to 60, at 10 miles per hour, that's 6 hours from there to there. Hence why it takes 2 days to get them back down and get them on board. We will see that repeatedly through the rest of the evening. The ship picks those sailors up, those injured, scald injured sailors on the 19th, and it will sail to Memphis to drop them off at a hospital at Memphis. And there are, by the end of the war, there are multiple hospitals in Memphis on the banks of the Mississippi. One of those hospitals was started by the Sisters Immaculate Conception, based out of Notre Dame, and the mother of Sisters, by the name of Sister Mary Angela, her last name is Gillespie, she sees this magnificent hospital ship. And she also learns that that ship's home base is at Mound City because her sisters also start a hospital there, General Hospital at Mound City, that we saw the pictures earlier. She saw that majestic hospital ship. And she offered the assistance, the services of her nuns to that ship. She wires at Cairo and tells the commanding officer there that her sisters are available for assistance. The Red Rover will arrive at the Mound City Hospital on June 26th. Now, some of you may say, hey, again, Mark, why does it take 26 days? Well, a couple things here. One, from Memphis to Mound City is 26 hours for the Red Rover to sail. That's an entire day. Also, they needed additional support. So they asked for and received nurses, male nurses, from the various ships that were part of the flotilla that happened to be stationed or at anchor on the Mississippi at Memphis to come over to the Red Rover and assist caring for these 37 scald victims. Significant burns, a lot of pain. I am confident they received laudanum, which would be liquid opium, liquid heroin to drink for pain reduction, as well as all the dressing changes and other care. Keep in mind also, they're not just having the 37, those are not their only patients. They all have other wounded from that battle there, that excursion on the White River, as well as other illnesses from sailors they were taking aboard from the flotilla. And then eventually they set sail on the June 24 and arrive on the 26th at Mound City Hospital. So that was part of the delay. So a little about the Sisters of the Holy Cross. Again, they're based out of St. Mary Immaculate Conception there at Notre Dame. As I said earlier, they opened Mound City Hospital in the fall, so that hospital was already in operation for over 6 months. They also started, as I mentioned, the hospital there at Memphis. They opened one there at Cairo, as well as Paducah on the Ohio River, one in Louisville, and even in Washington City. The nuns they had no nursing education whatsoever, no medical knowledge whatsoever, and they volunteered their services. The mother, Sister Mary Angela, put out the call to the sisters 3 times, and over that course of that call, by the end of the 3rd call, 65 of the 160 sisters there at St. Mary volunteered their services. 8 of these 65 will serve aboard Red Rover, 2 of which will serve their entire service aboard Red Rover during the Red Rover's lifespan during the war. There's Sister Mary Angela, and she mentioned that, yeah, my nurses, my nuns, my sisters receive 50 cents a day, 10 cents more than Army nurses. Each sister nurse also received a military pension, which helped pay for Bertrand Hall, which is now the Congregations Administration Building at St. Mary's, Notre Dame in Indiana. That building, Bertrand Hall, there it is, it still stands today. And again, keep in mind, they started Mound City Hospital that was, prior to that, was had multiple ownerships and multiple uses. In a particular time, at one point in time, was that furniture store. So keep in mind the Red Rover sailing up and down the Mississippi River. Also keep in mind, federal forces, they own the water, they don't own the land on either side. So while they may be sailing up and down, it's not a free-for-all. Occasionally, many times, almost always, Red Rover needs an escort. It will sail alongside a federal gunboat. It's mechanical. Things break down. And there will be times where it needs to be at Cairo to get repairs. And so that happens. So it's not every day that it's on the water sailing up and down. But at the end of September, the U.S. Navy purchases the entire Western gunboat and flotilla. And many of those ships, including Red Rover, are now belong to the U.S. Navy. And the Western gunboat and flotilla cease to exist. They will get a new name. That new name is the Mississippi Squadron. The Navy, prior to this, was operating only on blue water, so on ocean. The flotilla was operating exclusively on brown water. Now the Navy is operating not only on blue water, but also on brown water. The title has changed. So when you pick up a journal or a textbook or someone's personal diary, you'll see the language that changes from Western Gunboat Flotilla, and you'll see the word squadron. And it just, depending on that the words preceding squadron will tell you what theater of operation it is at. So by the end of September 30th, by the end of September, Red Rover will have admitted 374 patients, has a survival rate of 90%. Total sick days during this time, almost 10,000. And total expenses, this is medical expenses. This is not the expenses including salary for the medical staff, but those medical expenses, almost $3,500. So for October, November, December, the ship is sitting either at Cairo or Mound City getting fitted out, converted from Western Gunboat Flotilla specifications to U.S. Navy specifications, as well as getting winterized. And that will happen every fall as well. The ship needs to get winterized, and the ship breaks down and needs to have some repairs. So finally, the day after Christmas of 1862, it is commissioned into the U.S. Navy. Those pictures that we saw of the ship that said USN Hospital, all those pictures were taken after October 1st of 1862. We have no pictures of Red Rover prior to October 1 of 1862 because it does not belong to the U.S. Navy. It does not, otherwise, hence it would not say USN for United States Navy. But on board, stepping on board on December 26th, Sisters Mary Adela, Sister Mary Veronica, Sister Mary Callista. It was Sister Mary Adela who would serve the entire time aboard Red Rover, and she even stepped foot back in June when it arrived at Mound City. Other sisters who would serve aboard during the ship's lifetime: Mary Josephine, Mary Frances of Paula, Mary John of the Cross, Mary Anethius, and Mary Victoria. They all had to take the first name of Mary, and then they would pick their own name after that, and obviously then drop their last name. Once again, Red Rover makes it into Harper's Weekly. Very special ship. The Naval Hospital boat Red Rover. This institution is under the charge of Surgeon George Bixby and Dr. Hopkins. It's an untold comfort to our sick or wounded sailors. The sketch shows the main ward, in which all accommodations for over 200 patients. The sister is one of those good women whose angelic services have been sung by poets and breathed by grateful convalescents all the world over. The convalescents are placed in a ward for their sole use, where they smoke, read, generally enjoy themselves. A boat itself, a clean, roomy craft, is under the command of a gallant old sailor. May 9th, 1863. An excursion, an event on the Arkansas River at Napoleon, Arkansas. There is a fort under the Confederate fort by the name of Fort Heineman. It's captured during a 3 days battle, January 9th through the 11th of 1863. And keep in mind, so it's sitting right there. Again, the Red Rover is sitting on the Mississippi. It does not follow them up. And so it takes several hours, a couple days for them to get back down to pick up some of the wounded. And it will pick up the wounded and it will start to sail south on January 22nd, and it's not operating under maximum speed. The injured are being cared for on this hospital ship. It's not a hospital, it's not a water ambulance, so they're caring for the wounded. So they're sailing on down at their leisure speed under January 22nd. They come under rebel attack. Keep in mind, federal forces own the water, not the banks. They come under attack. 2 shots actually penetrate the upper decks of the hospital. The Red Rover, the sailors do return small arms fire, and this is one of the 2 times where that 32-pound gun is actually loaded, charged, but not fired. They will eventually make their ways down south, arriving at the Yazoo River just north of Vicksburg on January 23rd, where they would pick up additional wounded and sick sailors from Porter's Mississippi Squadron, which used to be that Western Gunboat Flotilla. Just different name. I also find it fascinating that all our pictures show just the starboard side of the ship, if you haven't caught up on that yet. Here's zooming in here. So here is that fort, and you can see just how tortuous the Arkansas River is there, and there's Napoleon. So the ship is, Red Rover, sitting out here, awaiting the return. This is the White River, and keep in mind that fort that I mentioned earlier was sitting up here. From the fort to the mouth there was 57 miles, or a straight shot 30 miles. Imagine just how many miles it is here, and you can see why it takes so long to get injured to Red Rover after the battle here at that fort. And you can also see there how just tortuous this is. I counted this up once. I cannot imagine many battles taking place during this time period there in Arkansas, because there's only 2 counties that do not have any type of river or creek running through it. Just fascinating to me. So you'd have to navigate those water barriers. Let's fast forward a little bit to April 16th. So Red Rover is part of the many month-long event to try and capture Vicksburg. Vicksburg was certainly for a while a thorn in the side of the federal forces, because that was stopping them from running all the way down to New Orleans. And the ships from New Orleans could not get past Vicksburg. So they arrived just north of Vicksburg for this campaign on April 16th, and toward the end of the capture of Vicksburg, Sister Mary Della mentioned that she was able to hear this because she says, yeah, we were near Vicksburg when it was taken, and we could hear the firing and see the boats running the blockade. Eventually, they would get past Vicksburg and carry stores and injured and sick back up to Memphis, arriving in Memphis on July 14th. But they were there for 3 months just north, sitting there at the mouth of the Yazoo River. But they would also run up and down between the mouth of that Yazoo River and Memphis, again carrying stores, beef, poultry, ice, medical provisions, burying the deceased along the banks of the Mississippi River as well. Eventually, they would be able to deliver medical supplies to Baton Rouge. If you're not aware, from Memphis to Baton Rouge, for this ship at maximum speed, 10 miles per hour, took 70 hours, 3 days from Memphis to Baton Rouge, which is just 30 miles south of Port Hudson. So from here to there, 3 days at maximum speed. But they got to stop every now and then. Why do they have to stop? They got a coal. They're burning 38 bushels of coal an hour. So they got to stop for coal. Also, I always wondered, how did they get information to know to stop and turn around and go back north or proceed and go south? So they would have to stop at Memphis, Vicksburg, when it finally was taken. If they were sailing north, they would stop at Cairo to get telegrams. Because there's no wire service, there's no radio, there's no cell phones. So they would have to stop at various cities to get their messages on how to proceed. Here's Vicksburg. There's the mouth, there's the Yazoo River, so the Red Rover would sit here for like 3 months, sailing up, going up and back, but basically this is where it was stationed. This is the general area where Grant's trying to dig that canal. But the reason why Vicksburg took so long is because it sat up on that hill, and to fire a shell from the water up, keep in mind the gravity's going against that solid shot eventually, or even the shells for that matter, because they're lighter, and pulling them back down to earth. Whereas at Vicksburg, they can see ships coming up this way very easily and lay waste to them. And here, because of the turn, it takes ships, they can't go at max speed and navigate that turn, and they would come around, and the Confederacy would see these ships making the turn. So that's why it took months for Vicksburg to fall. The ship goes back up after Vicksburg. It's the fall. It goes back up to its home base at Mound City, maybe at Cairo, to get winterized and get fitted out for the winter, get some repairs. I've recently learned that the Ohio River in the last 100 years has only frozen over 3 times. So very unlikely back in the day did the Ohio River completely freeze. However, and likewise the Mississippi River does not freeze, but as long as you are south of St. Louis. The St. Louis area would freeze, but those chunks would break off. I would imagine they did not want to send the ships, a hospital ship, down during the winter months for fear that it might run into some ice or get stuck on ice. Hence why it does not always operate January and February, depending on the climatic conditions of these 3 years. But on April 11th of 1864, it will leave Cairo. And it's on a routine mission, delivering stores or whatever. At some point in time, it gets message to say, hey, you need to stop at Fort Pillow because there has been a disaster there, a massacre. And it will arrive at Fort Pillow on April 13th, 2 days later. And it will pick up 13 wounded from that massacre, Certainly dozens more were injured and killed, as you may be aware. And it will sail on down then from Fort Pillow down to Memphis. That distance from Fort Pillow to Memphis at maximum speed of 10 miles per hour, again, if they're lucky to go that fast, is a 7-hour journey. They cannot go maximum speed during nighttime, keep in mind. There's no aids to navigation on the water. The river's not lit. So they're going a lot slower, hence why it takes, sometimes they can go 10 miles an hour, sometimes they can go 3 miles, or need to go 3 miles an hour, average of 5. Here's the surgeons that will serve on board. Again, this is Bixby. Here's a surgeon here, James Field. This is the paymaster. He's really important because everybody on board wants to get paid. This, ironically, we know his name is George Lawrence. That's a civilian right there. These are all other surgeons. This is Pickney, who's the fleet surgeon, will use Red Rover as his flagship as a surgeon. So the fact that this photo is taken with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 surgeons tells me that somebody's coming and going here. Somebody arrived and somebody is leaving. Bixby, again, will stay the entire time. Again, another nice port side photo, starboard side photo of our ship. Anne Bradford. She is a Secretary Gideon Wells makes an order and says, persons of color, commonly known as contraband, it is not proper that they should be compelled to render necessary and regular service without a stated compensation. Thus, anyone who's on the naval vessels that are there as working as contraband with the title of contraband need to get paid. Anne Bradford is one such person working on Red Rover. And she is subsequently paid $10 a month with that ration of one ration per day. On January 25th of 1863, on the roster, she was listed as contraband. And from June 1st of 64 through October 25, which is the last day of operation, or excuse me, not the last day of operation, October 25 of 64, she's listed as the title of nurse. Also, she will meet a gentleman by the name of Gilbert Stokes. He's there also on the ship, and they will actually, after the war, they get married. She will outlive him. And after the war, people always went up to her and said, you are entitled to a pension. You need to apply for a pension. And she was probably a little bit humbled by it, probably more embarrassed, and said, I can't do that, in part because she was illiterate. Finally, somebody helped her fill out that application, and she was awarded and granted that pension in the year 1890 at $12 a month, which is the same amount awarded to nurses. And she received that per month for the rest of her life. Other women working on board as nurse, contraband, laundress, sister of charity, all their dates vary in service. Like I said, Sister Mary Adela would serve the entire time aboard USS Rover as a naval hospital ship from the end of December of 1862 through August of 1865, but she was even there when it was under the flotilla. Those operating under the title of nurse: Anne Bradford, Ellen Campbell, Georgiana Harris, Sarah Nothing, Sarah Keno, Alice Kennedy, Betsy Young, Dennis Downs. Wrapping it up, the accolades for the ship. One of the largest and most beautiful steamers on the Mississippi with splendid accommodations for the sick. The Red Rover was fitted with every comfort, and poor Jack, when sick and wounded, was cared for in a style never before dreamed of in the Navy. Finally, we do. The ship does have a port side. Again, this is where the livestock would enter. So cattle were there, poultry. So in summary, Red Rover operated from June of 1862 to November of 1865. Again, I realize that the war ends in late spring, early summer, May, depending on your point of reference, April, May, beginning of June, the final. But it will be instrumental in getting wounded soldiers home, hence why it's still operating on brown water up and down the Mississippi through November of 1865. Has an average daily census of 50. Any given day normally would be 75 to 100. And from June 11th of 1862 through March of 1865, Red Rover will admit just under 1,700 patients, a survival rate of 93%. And then from April of 1865, at the end of hostilities, through its last day, November 17th of 1865, it will transport home 780 servicemen. At the turn of the century then, the United States Navy will incorporate the Navy Nurse Corps, 1908. A couple things. I realize that survival rate of 93% is very impressive. Some of you may be thinking, wow, that is fantastic. Keep in mind that if a soldier or sailor takes a bullet to the chest, they're not going to make it aboard the ship. That's an expectant. A significant head injury is not going to make it aboard the ship. Illness will make it aboard the ship. Scald burns will make it aboard the ship and get excellent care and survive. There were amputations that were done, so extremity injuries from ballistics will make it aboard the ship and survive. Some of those may not have survived without being aboard the ship and getting excellent care. Certainly if they were on just a hospital transport ship, there would be no amputation aboard that ship to be life-saving. So indeed, Red Rover was a hospital first. It was the first hospital ship to have physicians, surgeons, medical doctors on board. It became the Navy's first hospital ship. It was the first ship to allow nuns to work without medical experience, nuns to work as civilians. It was the first ship to pay female civilians. First U.S. ship to pay African Americans to work aboard. As a result, U.S. Navy, as of today, we have 2 hospital ships in the Navy, U.S. Navy ship Comfort and U.S. Navy ship Mercy. Also, the Veterans Administration at Great Lakes, Illinois, dedicated a building and named a building in its honor, USS Red Rover. And I thank you for your time. I'd be happy to entertain any questions. I realize that the time is late, but if you have any questions, I can take a few. Also, if you have any questions at the end, you have my abstract. It has my cell number. You can text me a question. You can email me a question. I'd be happy to certainly get back to you as well. And there's also, I have my references if you wanted to peruse some of those at your leisure, some of those citations as well. Maybe at some point in time you can look forward to my publication in some journal. I don't get any money for those journal submissions. Yes, sir.
What was the ship before the war started, and what happened to the ship after?
So the question is, what was the ship beforehand and afterwards? The ship was built in 1859. It was a merchant ship to deliver stores like livestock. It was sailed up and down the Mississippi from Girard and all the way down to New Orleans. At the end of the war, like all naval ships for the Union forces, they were sold for scrap. If they had any artillery pieces on them, and they were melted down. And those, if you're not aware, that most of the artillery pieces for both sides originated from church bells. If they were not, if they were bronze, they came from church bells. But the ship was sold for scrap for a couple $100. Excellent question. And that was just right at, almost immediately at the end of the war, sir. Yes, sir.
Are you absolutely sure about that? Because I just read just yesterday that the ship was used up until the Spanish-American War by the Navy, that it was commissioned. So, I mean, I'm no expert on this.
The citation that I have is fairly reliable. The gentleman says he was challenging the issue that the ship was immediately sold for scrap. The citation I have is from the United States Navy itself, the historical documents, the archives of the United States Navy. Yes, sir.
Where did they get all that ice, and how did they keep it from melting down south?
Great question. So the question is, hey, where'd they get all the ice? That ice came from Canada, and it was a production, a very lucrative production to get that ice. When ice is, I do not dispute that it would start to melt, but it does not melt because it's solid. It does not melt to the degree which one would think. My maternal grandfather told me, and even my mother would occasionally remind me that when they would have an ice box, he worked at the Ford Motor Plant his entire career, and on his way home, he would stop at the ice house and purchase a block of ice, and he would get home and he would put that block of ice in the ice box. It goes in the bottom, and there's a tray underneath it. And that block of ice is only about this big, and it would survive the entire week. Hence why he only had to get one block of ice. And that was the refrigerator. Some of you may recall that from your parental discussions as well. So that solid ice, a 10 by 10 by 10 block, does not melt very fast. But it was a lucrative, what I want to say, business up in the north. But a great question. Yes, anybody else? Yes, sir, last question.
Were there any ships that followed this technique?
Any other ships that were, yes. So the question is, were there any other ships that came after Red Rover? Yes. There was the city of Nashville that became a hospital ship operating on brown water. But its history, as far as the detail for which Red Rover has, is lost to history. I cannot find the history of that. So I often wonder, was city of Nashville a true hospital ship? Because I cannot find documentation that shows that it actually had surgeons, medical doctors on board. Yes?
How long has it taken for you to acquire the detail that you have?
I appreciate the question. The question is, how long did it take me to compile this presentation? I've long been a student of Civil War history. I loved when in grade school when it would come around, because I always saw the picture of the Monitor and the Merrimack, And actually, one of my presentations is the life and times of the surgeon who served aboard the USS Monitor. I'd be happy to come back and tell you about him at some point in time. His name was Daniel Logg. The Monitor actually had over its 11-month lifespan, it actually had 3 surgeons that served aboard. Logg was there at that epic battle of Hampton Roads. I would stumble across some information on topics of Civil War that had a medical component to it, and I put it into a shoebox. That shoebox became 2 shoeboxes. Those 2 shoeboxes became a banker's box, and eventually that banker box became 4 banker's boxes, one for snake bites, one for weapons of mass destruction that were considered during the Civil War, one for USS Red Rover, and one for Surgeon Todd. Surgeon Todd, by my recollection, my research, his name is George B. Todd, no relation to Mary Todd. He is the only person to shake President Lincoln's hand the day of his assassination, witness his assassination, and witness the autopsy of Lincoln's assassin, because he is a surgeon that served aboard USS Montauk, for which that autopsy was conducted. You're welcome.
Well, Mark, thank you very much for your presentation. Like I said before, I didn't know anything, and now I know a little bit more. Present you with our Certificate of Honor by order of the General Staff of the Civil War Roundtable in Milwaukee. This award is presented to Mark Laubacher for furthering our understanding of the causes and consequences of the American Civil War, the watershed event in our nation's history.
Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you.